I saw a video where my wife was cheating on me, so I threw her out of the house, but in court, it was proven that it was her twin sister. My wife divorced me and married someone else. I've always valued trust and loyalty above everything else in life. From my years in the military to the day I got married, I believed that I had brought that same sense of discipline into my family. My path seemed clear, and I thought I had everything planned out. I met Sarah when we were young, and while our relationship had its bumps, I thought we had built something solid, something that could weather any storm. We faced challenges, sure, but nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that was waiting around the corner. Together, Sarah and I built a life. We had two beautiful daughters, Emily and Sophie, and a home I thought was a sanctuary, a place where we could all feel safe and at peace. I worked hard, determined to be the best father and husband I could be. But despite all the effort, there was always this faint feeling in the back of my mind that I was missing something. It was a quiet thought, barely noticeable, but it was there. Still, I never imagined the scale of the betrayal that was about to unfold. I married Sarah when I was 30, filled with hope for our future together. By that point, we had been together for 6 years, and our daughters were still very young. Sarah seemed like the perfect wife, and I believed we were both content with our lives. That illusion shattered one night when I stumbled upon something that would change everything. It was a video on a website called Secret Lovers, and watching it felt like my entire world crumbled around me. The night I found the video started like any other. I was going through some old boxes in the attic when I came across a DVD. It was unmarked, but something told me it wasn't just some old movie. Curious, I put it in the player. As the video started, I saw her face, Sarah's face. My heart stopped. I paused the video and stared at the screen. She looked slightly younger, but it was her, no doubt. Desperate to be sure, I rushed to the closet and pulled out some old photo albums. Flipping through them frantically, I finally found a picture that matched. Same hairstyle, same makeup. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This video had been made when we were newly married. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with thoughts, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. How could she have done this? I had trusted her. I had loved her. And now I was staring at undeniable proof that she had betrayed me in the most personal way. But instead of breaking down, my military training kicked in. I knew I had to act quickly, decisively. Attack is the best defense, and surprise is an advantage. I needed to get her out of the house as quickly and cleanly as possible, with minimal damage to myself. The good thing was, we didn't have joint accounts. The house was in my name, and with the evidence I had, I was certain I could secure custody of the kids. So I grabbed a handful of black trash bags and started packing up everything that was hers. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, everything she owned went into those bags. By the time I was done, there were several bags lined up in the garage, waiting for her. Now, all I had to do was wait. Sarah, who worked as a legal secretary, came home late that night. She smiled and apologized for being late, mentioning that she had dropped the kids off at her parents' house so we could have a romantic evening together. I just grunted in response, barely holding it together as she went upstairs to shower. Quietly, I took her keys off the ring and put them in my pocket. Then I waited in the kitchen. When she came downstairs, wrapped in a towel and looking confused, she asked where her clothes were. I told her they were in the garage. "It's time for you to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She stared at me, completely bewildered, before the tears started. She denied everything, of course. She swore she didn't know what I was talking about, but I wasn't having any of it. I told her that if she didn't leave on her own, I would make her. She tried to resist, but I grabbed her by the arms and started dragging her toward the door. In the struggle, she tripped and refused to get up, so I pulled her up by her hair. The towel dropped to the floor, and she screamed, trying to hit me, but I was too furious to care. As I dragged her toward the door, I noticed I had a handful of her hair. I threw open the door and tossed her out onto the lawn, where she landed in the bushes. Without hesitation, I grabbed her car keys and the DVD, then stepped back outside. She was sitting on the lawn, sobbing uncontrollably. I threw her the car keys and shouted, "Take your car and get out." But she just sat there, crying, asking, "Why, Daniel? Why are you doing this?" I hurled the DVD at her, shouting, "This will tell you why." It hit her below the eye, leaving a small cut on her cheek. I slammed the door shut and watched through the window as she struggled to cover herself. Mrs. Anderson, our nosy neighbor from across the street, came rushing over with a coat, wrapping it around Sarah. Of course, I thought, she would help her. I turned away and went back inside, ignoring the sight of Sarah getting into her car and driving away. After she left, I finished clearing out the last of her things, took a shower, and headed to the bar. I drank heavily until closing time, then staggered home, collapsing into bed, numb and exhausted. The next morning, I woke with a pounding hangover. My head throbbed, and the events of the previous night felt like a distant dream. That is, until I heard loud knocking at the door. "Sarah, all your stuff is in the garage," I shouted groggily, assuming she had come back to pick up the rest of her belongings. "Mr. Daniel Carter, this is the police. Open up." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. Police? What for? Confused and still half asleep, I opened the door to find two officers standing on my front step. "Are you Daniel Carter?" one of them asked. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, rubbing my eyes. "You're under arrest for assault causing actual bodily harm," the officer said, stepping forward. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What? Assault? On who?" "On Mrs. Sarah Carter," he said, as he moved to handcuff me. Wait. All I did was throw her out after I found out she'd been cheating on me. I didn't do anything wrong." "That's not for me to decide," the officer replied calmly. "Please get dressed and come with us." Stunned and disoriented, I got dressed and was led out of my house, my neighbors watching as I was taken away in the back of a police car. When we got to the station, they showed me photos of Sarah's injuries: scratches on her arms, bruises on her legs, a cut on her cheek, and the clump of hair I had ripped from her head. Seeing the photos, the reality of what I had done started to sink in. I tried to explain what had happened, telling them that I had found the video of her, that she had cheated on me while we were married, but the detective didn't seem interested in my side of the story. "I expect you to follow the law," he said coldly. "That's all." After being charged and released on bail, I was given a court date for the following Monday. When I got back home, all of Sarah's belongings were gone. I didn't hear from her or her parents over the weekend. On Monday, my case was referred to a higher court, and I was ordered to surrender my passport. By Tuesday, I was working with a lawyer to start the divorce process. I handed him the DVD and some photos from our honeymoon, and he seemed confident that we could get through it quickly. He said that with the evidence I had, I would likely get custody of the kids and keep the house. That bit of hope kept me going, but it didn't last long. On Wednesday, I received a letter from Sarah's lawyer saying that she was filing for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and had been granted an injunction to keep me 200 yards away from her, her parents, and, worst of all, our daughters. I was livid. She was divorcing me? After what she had done? After she had cheated on me? I was the victim here. I called my lawyer immediately, but when we met later that week, the conversation didn't go as I had hoped. He was furious that I hadn't told him everything, especially about the assault charge. Now, with her claims of cruelty and the criminal charges, my chances of winning custody were slipping away. He suggested we change the divorce petition to irreconcilable differences to avoid a messy court battle, but I refused. She had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Over the next few weeks, I tried to keep going, but my life was falling apart. The anger I had felt that night slowly started to fade, but it was replaced with a deep sadness. I missed my kids terribly. The house, once filled with their laughter, felt empty and cold. I stopped cooking, started eating out every night, and drank more than I should have. My work began to suffer, and soon I started receiving letters about overdue bills. Sarah had canceled all the direct payments for the mortgage and utilities, leaving me to deal with hundreds of dollars in debt. The $1,000 I normally set aside for household expenses wasn't enough, and I had no idea how I was going to manage. A month later, I finally received a court date for the divorce hearing. I hadn't heard from Sarah or her lawyer in weeks, and the silence was unbearable. On the day of the hearing, I showed up in my best suit, hoping for the best. Sarah was there, but she avoided making eye contact with me. My lawyer presented the video, arguing that Sarah's behavior made her unfit to raise our daughters and that I should be granted full custody. But when it was Sarah's turn to speak, she dropped a bombshell that none of us saw coming. She claimed that the woman in the video wasn't her. It was her twin sister, Jessica. The courtroom fell silent as Jessica was called to testify. She admitted that it was her in the video, explaining that she and Sarah led very different lives. Jessica had struggled with substance abuse and promiscuity for years, but had turned her life around with Sarah's help. As I sat there, stunned, the judge noted the striking resemblance between the two women. My lawyer tried to argue that it didn't matter, but Jessica showed a small tattoo on her ankle that matched the one in the video, proving that she was telling the truth. The judge dismissed my petition, and I felt the floor fall out from under me. All the anger, all the rage that had fueled me for the last few months vanished, leaving behind only emptiness. After the hearing, I apologized to Sarah. I told her I was sorry for not waiting to get all the facts before acting, but she just looked at me and said, "You didn't wait, did you?" Then she walked away. That afternoon, Sarah filed her own divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences. I didn't even try to fight it. There was no point. The judge awarded her custody of the kids and gave her the house until the girls turned 18. Our assets were to be split, and I was ordered to pay child support. To make matters worse, I still had the assault trial hanging over my head, and my access to the children would be arranged through social services. Feeling defeated, I went home to find a letter with my trial date. Desperate for someone to talk to, I called my accountant, Claire. She had been managing my finances since Sarah had handled everything before the separation. Claire was a straightforward, no-nonsense woman, and while we had developed a friendship, I could tell she wasn't thrilled about my situation. When I told her everything that had happened, she was shocked. "You really thought throwing her out like that was the right thing to do?" she asked. "I lost control," I admitted. "It wasn't even her in the video." We talked for hours, finishing 2 bottles of wine. When I was about to leave, Claire insisted that I stay the night. "I'm not letting you drive after all this," she said. So I stayed, unsure if I was crossing a line in our friendship. The next morning, I asked Claire if she could manage my business if I went to prison. She agreed, though she hoped it wouldn't come to that. 2 weeks later, I stood in court, waiting for my trial to begin. I had pled guilty to the assault charges. During the proceedings, my lawyer tried to argue that the video had led to a misunderstanding, but I interrupted him, admitting the truth. It wasn't Sarah in the video. I was wrong. I confessed to losing control and acknowledged how much I had ruined by acting impulsively. I apologized sincerely and begged for leniency, though I had no real hope of it. When Sarah took the stand, she surprised me. She acknowledged my past kindness, explaining that I hadn't known about her twin sister and that I had acted out of misunderstanding. She asked the judge for mercy, stating that our children needed their father, even though we were no longer together. I could hardly believe it. After everything that had happened, Sarah was still standing up for me. The judge took into account my military service, my remorse, and Sarah's plea for leniency. Instead of jail time, I was sentenced to 6 months, suspended for 2 years. That meant as long as I stayed out of trouble, I wouldn't have to serve time. Relief washed over me, though it was bittersweet. I thanked Sarah afterward, telling her that I didn't deserve her kindness. She simply replied, "I don't hate you, Daniel, but I hate what you did. Get help." I knew she was right. I had lost control that night, and it scared me to think that I could hurt someone like that again. Back at work, my staff welcomed me back warmly, and life began to feel normal again. But I wasn't taking care of myself. I still felt lost. That's when Claire, my accountant, sat me down to go over my finances. "Daniel," she said bluntly, "you've been bleeding money. Julie was covering the shortfall in your business for years. You need to wake up to what's really going on." It hit me hard. I had always thought I was the provider, that I was taking care of everything. But in reality, Sarah had been holding things together behind the scenes. Claire told me I had to either cut expenses or increase revenue, or my business would collapse. I decided to cut costs, letting go of one of my employees and scaling back on some of the services we offered. It wasn't easy, but I knew it had to be done. As the weeks passed, I began to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. I missed my daughters terribly, and my visits with them were still supervised by social services. The process was humiliating, but I knew I had to endure it if I wanted to be a part of their lives. My first few visits were awkward. Emily ran to me as soon as she saw me, but Sophie was more cautious. The environment was strange for both of us, and I could tell the girls were uncomfortable. I brought coloring books and toys to try and make the visits more enjoyable, but the tension was still there. After about 6 weeks, the social worker, Janice, smiled at me and said, "We've decided supervision is no longer needed. You and Sarah can now work out visitation on your own." I was overjoyed. It felt like a small victory in the middle of the chaos my life had become. I thanked Janice profusely, and we joked about how grateful I was to be graduating from supervised visits. When I saw Sarah later that day, I told her the good news. She seemed relieved, and we quickly agreed that I would have the girls every other Sunday, with the plan to extend it to weekends once I found a more suitable place for them to stay. On the first unsupervised visit, Sarah and I sat down for coffee before I took the girls out. She was friendly, almost like the Sarah I had known years before everything fell apart. As we talked, she mentioned that she had met someone named Eric, and that she was happy. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind was elsewhere. It was hard to see her moving on, especially when I felt like my life was stuck in limbo. Still, I was glad she was in a good place. After all, we had both been through enough pain. Despite the awkwardness, the visits with the girls went well. Emily and Sophie were beginning to feel more comfortable around me again, and our time together became something I looked forward to more than anything else. Sarah and I continued to communicate amicably about the girls, but there was always this underlying tension between us. We were cordial, but not quite friends. Then, a few weeks later, I received a letter from Sarah's solicitor. It was a proposal. Sarah was willing to give up her share of my business in exchange for my share of the house. At first, I was shocked. The house was worth significantly more than the business, and without the mortgage, I would be in a much better financial position. I took some time to think it over and eventually agreed to the deal. I handed over my share of the house, and in return, I got full ownership of my business. When I tried to talk to Sarah about the deal, she was distant. "It was never my intention to punish you, Daniel," she said. "You're still the father of my children." Her words stung. I wasn't sure if she was being genuine or if this was just another step in her moving on. Regardless, I had to focus on rebuilding my life. Living with Claire, though comfortable at first, was becoming complicated. We had been friends for years, and though our relationship had become more intimate since my divorce, it was clear that Claire wanted something more. She started introducing me as her partner at social events, and even when I slept in my own bed, I would wake up to her offering me affection in the morning. It was becoming too much. One evening, I finally sat her down and said, "Claire, we're still just friends, right?" She seemed embarrassed. "I hoped we were becoming more than that," she admitted. I shook my head, feeling guilty. "I love you, Claire, but not in the way you want." Julie could say the word, and I'd be gone. "I don't want to hurt you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and I held her as she cried. Eventually, we agreed that it was time for me to move out. A few weeks later, I found a small flat above a takeaway shop. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I needed the space, both physically and emotionally, to sort through everything that had happened. With my living situation settled, I focused on growing my business. I sold my prized car, a vintage Mustang, for the capital I needed to expand. It was a tough decision. Sarah and I had bought that car together, but I knew it was necessary. I opened a roadside tire service for trucks, and to my surprise, it took off. Business was thriving, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Despite the progress, I still felt a sense of loneliness. Claire and I had maintained a friendship, though it was more distant now, and while I dated casually, nothing serious developed. My mind was still on Sarah, even though I knew she had moved on. Christmas was approaching, and I was torn between spending the holiday with Claire or with the girls. Sarah had invited me to spend Christmas Day with them, but it felt like the invitation was more for the girls than for me. I declined, choosing to spend the day with Claire, but offered to come by on Boxing Day instead. When I told Sarah my decision, she was upset. She called me at work, asking why I would choose to spend Christmas with Claire instead of my children. I explained that Claire didn't have anyone else to spend the day with and that I didn't want her to be alone. Sarah eventually calmed down and, to my surprise, invited Claire to join us for Boxing Day. It felt strange, but I appreciated the gesture. Christmas came and went, and Boxing Day arrived. Claire and I spent the day with Sarah, Emily, and Sophie, and to my surprise, it went well. At the end of the day, Claire leaned over and whispered, "It's obvious, Daniel. Sarah still loves you. Everyone can see it except the two of you." I wasn't so sure. Sarah and I had been getting along better, but the wounds from our past were still there. As much as I wanted to believe what Claire said, I knew that our relationship had changed irrevocably. In the weeks following Christmas, Sarah and I continued to grow closer. We started spending more time together, though it was mostly for the sake of the girls. There were moments when I thought we might be on the verge of reconciliation, but then something would shift, and we'd be back to square one. It was frustrating, but I tried to be patient. I had to focus on rebuilding my life, and if Sarah and I were meant to be together again, it would happen in time. About 2 years after our divorce, I made a major business deal, buying out a small car dealership for $200,000. It was a huge step forward for my company, and with Claire's help, I secured a loan to make the purchase. Business was booming, and I was finally in a place where I could provide for my daughters without financial strain. I even offered one of my employees, Tom, the chance to become his own boss by renting out a bay in the new workshop. He accepted eagerly, and within a year, all of the service bays were full. Around the same time, I met Kelly, a charming blonde who worked for an auto supply company. She flirted with me from the start, and after a few weeks of back-and-forth banter, I asked her out. Our first date went well, and it didn't take long for things to turn physical. Kelly made it clear that she wanted more than just casual dinners, and though I was hesitant at first, I found myself drawn to her. We began seeing each other regularly, but there was something about her that didn't sit right with me. Kelly was secretive. She never talked much about her personal life, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. One night, after she left my place, I knocked over her handbag and found 2 gold rings inside, one of them with a diamond. My suspicions were confirmed. Kelly was married. The next time I saw her, I confronted her about the rings. She tried to lie at first, claiming she had lost them, but when I pressed her, she broke down. She confessed that she wasn't divorced and that she was still living with her husband, who worked night shifts. Her mother thought she was out with friends whenever she snuck out to see me. I was furious, but more than that, I was disappointed. I had trusted Kelly, and now I realized she had been lying to me from the start. I told her I couldn't continue seeing her and asked her to leave. She tried to apologize, but it was too late. As she walked out, I couldn't help but think about how I had let myself fall into the same pattern again, trusting someone only to be betrayed. A week later, I was back at Sarah's house to pick up the girls. As I stood in the kitchen, I noticed that our old wedding photo was missing from the mantel. "I see you're not wearing your rings anymore," I remarked casually. Sarah looked away, avoiding eye contact. "Well, I haven't been married for 4 years," she replied. There was a sadness in her voice, but I didn't press the issue. As my 40th birthday approached, I decided to treat myself to a new car. I bought a sleek, black Mercedes and couldn't wait to show it off. On the day of my birthday, my employees surprised me with a party at the workshop. We had drinks, a catered dinner, and even a stripper, a joke organized by Tom and Eric, my business partner. Despite the fun, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Neither Sarah nor the girls had sent me a birthday card, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. Claire tried to cheer me up, but I knew I needed more than just a distraction. I needed to figure out what was really going on in my life and what I wanted for the future. The following Sunday, I picked up Emily and Sophie in my new car. They were thrilled, and when we arrived at Sarah's house, Emily excitedly told her mom, "Have you seen Dad's new car?" Sarah looked surprised. "What brought that on?" "It was a birthday present to myself," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Emily glared at her mother. "I told you we needed to get something for Dad's birthday, but you made us spend the day with Miles instead. I hate him and I hate you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and I quickly reassured her, telling her that Emily didn't mean it. She was just upset about missing my birthday. Sarah apologized, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She had moved on with her life, but it was clear that things with Miles weren't as perfect as she wanted them to be. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off between Sarah and Miles. The girls didn't like him, and Sarah seemed distant whenever I asked about him. I tried to stay out of it, focusing on my business and my relationship with my daughters, but I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on behind the scenes. One evening, Sarah called me, asking if we could meet for dinner. She sounded nervous, and I had no idea what to expect. When I arrived at the restaurant, she looked stunning in a black dress. We made small talk over dinner, but I could tell she had something important to say. Finally, after we finished eating, she took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, I didn't invite you here to talk about getting back together. I'm getting married to Miles." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I tried to hide my shock. "What do you need from me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "There's something you can help with," she said, her voice trembling. "Miles's family wants the girls to take his name. He can't have children, and his family will disown him if he marries me without the girls taking his name." I was floored. "Wait, you're asking me to let him adopt my daughters? How long have you known this guy?" "I've known Miles for 5 years. He's a barrister, and we work together." "This isn't sudden, Daniel." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I had been blindsided. "Sarah, I'm not letting anyone adopt my children, especially someone they don't even like. You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her frustration growing. "I thought you'd be happy to stop paying child support. That's all I'm asking." I could feel my anger rising. "Sarah, I've changed, but I'm not the kind of man who would sell his children just to save a few dollars. Tell me, how does this benefit the girls?" She had no answer, and I knew she didn't really expect me to agree. This was about her and Miles, not our children. After a long silence, she finally said, "Miles can't have children. This is the only way." I shook my head, feeling betrayed all over again. "I won't sign anything until you're married," I said firmly. "And I want it in writing that my access to the girls stays the same." Sarah nodded, though I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Miles showed up at the restaurant a few minutes later, and I could feel the tension between us as I stood to leave. I leaned in close as I shook his hand and whispered, "If you ever hurt her or my kids, I'll make you regret it. That's a promise." Miles paled, but said nothing. The next morning, I got a call from Emily. "Dad, come quick. Mommy's not waking up." I rushed over to Sarah's house and found her unconscious in bed, an empty bottle of pills on the nightstand. I grabbed her and the girls, rushing them to the hospital as fast as I could. On the way, a police officer pulled me over, but when he saw the situation, he offered to escort us to the hospital. Sarah was treated, and the doctors said she would be okay. But I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to such a dark place. As I sat by her bed, I asked, "Sarah, why? Why would you do this?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "I've been such a fool, Daniel. He never wanted to marry me. He just used me." She broke down, and I held her, feeling a strange mix of pity and anger. Miles had manipulated her, and now she was paying the price. Sarah looked up from her coffee, her expression thoughtful but hesitant. "Therapy?" she repeated, as if the word alone carried the weight of everything she'd been avoiding. "Yeah," I nodded. "For both of us. I think we've been trying to handle everything on our own for too long. The girls deserve parents who can manage their emotions, who can be there for them without all this chaos." She sighed, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her cup. "I don't know, Daniel. I've always thought I could just fix things myself, but now I don't know if I can." "It's not about fixing things on your own," I said gently. "It's about admitting that sometimes we can't do it all. I've been in therapy since everything went down, and it's helped. More than I thought it would." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "You've been in therapy?" "Yeah," I admitted. "After the divorce, and especially after the assault charge. It wasn't easy to face everything I'd done, but I knew if I didn't, I'd keep spiraling." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she was going to refuse. But then she spoke softly, "Okay, I'll do it. For the girls. Maybe for myself too." Relief washed over me. This was a step, perhaps a small one, but a step nonetheless. I can help you find someone, I offered. Someone good. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it could help. She nodded, and the tension between us began to ease. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start. The days that followed were a blur of appointments and difficult conversations. Sarah found a therapist, and I continued with my sessions. Meanwhile, our co-parenting arrangement became more structured. We worked out a schedule that allowed me to spend more time with Emily and Sophie, and it seemed to calm things down for the girls as well. They needed stability, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah and I were on the same page about how to give it to them. During this time, I focused on my business, which was thriving. The roadside tire service I had launched was picking up momentum, and I'd expanded the company with a new workshop. Tom, my employee, was doing a great job managing things on the ground, and the trust I'd placed in him paid off. Every week, more trucks were coming in, and soon, we had to hire additional staff to keep up with demand. But despite the business success, I couldn't shake the loneliness that lingered after everything I'd been through with Sarah. Claire and I had maintained our friendship, but it was different now. After our talk about boundaries and feelings, things had become more distant between us. I appreciated her as a friend and a colleague, but I couldn't give her what she wanted. In truth, I wasn't sure I could give anyone that right now. Then one afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Sarah. "Daniel, can you come over?" Her voice was strained, anxious. "What's going on?" I asked, my mind immediately racing to the worst possible scenarios involving the kids. "It's not the girls," she said quickly. It's about Miles." Miles. The very mention of his name stirred up a mix of emotions. Anger, resentment, and now, curiosity. I hadn't heard anything about him in weeks, not since Sarah had called off the engagement after realizing what kind of man he really was. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I replied, grabbing my jacket and heading out the door. When I arrived at Sarah's house, she greeted me at the door, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "What happened?" I asked, stepping inside. Sarah led me to the living room, where she sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling. "He's dead, Daniel. Miles is dead." For a moment, the words didn't register. "What do you mean, dead?" "He was in a car accident. Late last night. I just found out this morning." Her voice broke as she spoke. I sat down across from her, my mind spinning. "What happened? Do you know any details?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Apparently, he was driving drunk. He lost control of the car and hit a tree. They found him this morning. It was instant." I didn't know what to say. Despite my feelings toward Miles and everything he'd done, I hadn't expected this. Death has a way of making everything seem smaller, less significant in the grand scheme of things. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure what else to offer. Sarah's relationship with him had been a disaster, but that didn't make his death any less tragic. I don't know how to feel," she admitted, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I mean, he lied to me, he used me, but I didn't want him to die." I nodded. "It's okay to feel conflicted. You don't have to sort it all out right now." She looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this, Daniel. The girls, the therapy, my job, everything just feels too much." I leaned forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll figure it out, one day at a time." In the weeks following Miles's death, things shifted between Sarah and me. We found ourselves talking more, not just about the girls or logistics, but about life, about what we'd been through and how we could move forward. There was no mention of getting back together, but we both acknowledged that we were in a better place now than we had been in years. The therapy was helping both of us in different ways. For Sarah, it was about working through her guilt and shame over the choices she'd made. For me, it was about continuing to manage my anger and learning to let go of the resentment I'd held onto for so long. We were healing, albeit slowly, and it was clear that our relationship, whatever it was now, was becoming more stable, more grounded.